appreciate how the two of you, condensed your much longer talks. But I wanted to give you a chance to respond to one another. So I thought we'd actually give you a chance to have a conversation here. So then you can sit up and you probably have comments about what each other said. So, Jerry, go ahead.
Regarding dark money, the big money being spent in this campaign is by the teachers union and other labor unions. They have a budget of $5 million to feed this convention budget. If you look at the filings for spending, you'll find that institutional money is all against the convention. And if you look at the filings of the supportive groups, all that money is from individuals. So it's exactly opposite the point presented. The support for the convention is by institutions that don't want it to happen, like the ones you saw listed. And the opposition is by individuals like, for example, I've made a contribution of $500 to an organization to support the convention. And there are 97 people in that organization that are sponsoring, and each have made personal contributions. So so this dark money idea is prospective. If there's a convention approved, allegedly dark money will come in. Now remember that New York has 3 million more enrolled Democrats than enrolled Republicans. I made a projection on what the election outcome would be in a convention because Dr. Tobin required it of me. And I projected that 114 Democrat delegates would be elected and 90 Republicans. Now I can project under different scenarios. But the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of solid Democrat districts that will never return Republicans, and there are a lot of competitive Republican districts that will return 1 Democrat and 2 Republicans, which is 3 from the district. And the statewide outcome will be the Democrat outcome because of the relative strength of the Democratic Party. So we're not going to elect a right-wing convention. In fact, the people most against the convention among my friends who are against it because they are fearful of who will dominate are on the right of the political spectrum, not on the left of the political spectrum. That's a prediction that the right is making, and that's why it's not engaged now, because it doesn't want a convention. The right doesn't want a convention because they fear who would be elected delegates. Regarding home rule is in New York has not been realized for the most part, and the people who want home rule are the advocates for a convention. I just wrote a law review article about home rule, and the example given was an exceptional example, and it had to do with the legal question was, did the state preempt the locality with regard to the fracking bans in those local governments that had banned it? And the fact was that because of the nature of state law and the lack of specificity, and because it was a land use control matter, preemption was not found by the courts. Now, this is a technical legal question we can go into, but the point is, home rule is being advocated by change-oriented people, and we have to change the Constitution to get it, so we don't have the legislature saying if you want to ban plastic bags in your community, you can't do it because it's a matter of state concern, which is an absurd position. Or if you want to have Uber in your community, you can't have it unless we pass a state law. It's an absurd position. These are local matters. Regarding collective pension protection in the Constitution is for public pensions. It's not for all pensions. So collective bargaining for public employees is not constitutionally protected. Collective bargaining for private sector employees is constitutionally protected. It could be constitutionally protected if we had a convention that public employees bargain on the basis of a statutory provision passed during the Nelson Rockefeller administration. So we need to be factual in these conversations and understand what's actually at stake from a legal point of view. The institutions aren't working. That's the fundamental point. They're 19th century institutions that aren't working, aren't representative, aren't accountable, and we can change them only by taking hold of the opportunity we have to call a meeting. No incumbents running. Nobody holds a delegate position now. Support the people you want to get elected and change the process in accord with your values.
All right, so going back to the money item, I know of one. So as of June of 2016, there was one coalition in favor of the convention in New York City that had said they had already raised $400,000 to support the convention. That was over a year ago. I have no clue how much they've raised since then.
600,000.
The unions have decided, well, the filings show that they've dedicated about $650,000 so far to the Constitutional Convention. So, if the $600,000 figure is correct and the $650,000 figure is correct for the unions, then that's about the same on each side. So that's really the major issue there.
What about the question that Jerry raised about, actually you sound much more like a radical person because you want to change the existing situation, and you end up sort of sounding like...
You haven't heard anything yet. I'm trying to hold myself back because of this conservative crowd.
I'm not sure it's a conservative crowd. But see, what about issues like an organization like Reclaim New York, for example, which is funded by Rebecca Mercer. She's the Steve Bannon group, right? That's one of a question, for example, about dark money, about an organization that makes it look like they're there for change and liberal causes, but in fact they're not. So maybe.
So on Reclaim New York, I already mentioned them on context of home rule. But to give the context to how much money that one group is dedicating to the state, as of last month, the entire campaign arms of all parties in the state senate had $24 million in the bank. Reclaim New York alone has already dedicated $25 million to whatever they want to do in New York. So we haven't even gotten into real campaign season yet, and there are groups lining up with way more money than anyone else is going to be able to spend on campaigns, which is why I always advocate for targeting campaigns and running people-centered campaigns, because you don't want to. Good example that happened recently. I look at the congressional race in Georgia. They spent $50 million on that race and didn't move the needle on anything. You have to run people-centered campaigns. It doesn't matter how much money you have if you have enough people. So
It was Georgia 6.
Yes, Georgia 6, and that's the model you have to take in New York. And it's a lot easier to get 6 state senators who want the same changes as you do than to elect 204 delegates.
So are you saying that you kind of agree with Jerry in some of the changes that need to happen?
Yeah, we agree on a lot of the changes that need to happen. It's just the mechanism to get there, which is unfortunate.
The Democrats have elected a majority to the state senate. They can't organize. They can't meet in the same room. They can't elect a majority leader. This is a process you're talking about that has failed of leadership when the so-called alternative has come into power. It's an institutional set of institutional arrangements that doesn't work. So we can ignore the evidence and hope that if we elect worthy Senate candidates, something will change. By the way, the principal opponent of the convention is the Speaker of the Assembly. And most incumbent Assembly members are opposing, in the majority party, are opposing a convention. And when we put bills in to change the process to address the concerns that were raised by groups like the League of Women Voters, which is now supporting the convention, when we put bills in, they wouldn't move the bills.
All right, so
they don't want this to happen. You don't give people in power the power to undermine their power base. Not a smart process. Einstein would say, you don't have to be an Einstein to know that.
On the topic of the League of Women Voters, actually, I was at a meeting of theirs in Albany in July, where they said that they actually reopened their position on the Constitutional Convention, specifically because they are now concerned with the amount of dark money that they see coming into New York on the issue. So historically, you search online, you'll see PowerPoints and stuff that say they support it. But last time I spoke to them in Albany, they said they'd reopened their position. So I haven't heard that they've actually come to a conclusion on the position since July. But even groups that have historically been in favor are coming to new positions.
They're not historically in favor. I was chief of the staff for the Constitutional Convention Commission in 1994.
Well, if you go online right
And they were-
now,
and they
you
were
have
against-
documents and PowerPoint
The fact
that
of
say
the
they are
matter,
in favor.
the fact of the matter is they were against, they are now for it. It's an official position taken statewide by the league.
Okay, so there seems to be some difference of opinion there. Let me
It's not a matter of, excuse me, but I have to insist, matters of opinion are fine, and we might differ on opinion, but you don't get a chance to invent your own facts.
Well, as of July 2017, when I was actually at their meeting, that's what they told me.
Call Dare Thompson, she lives in Ulster County, she'll tell you.
Texted her.
Okay. Well,
I'd like to phrase a question for both of you, and then I'm going to put it open to the, to the audience for Q&A. So from what it sounds like, you both agree that changes should happen to our Constitution, the New York State Constitution. There's a lot of things that are wrong with it. However, it sounds like, Jerry, you're saying that the current legislature, which is one of the ways we can change our Constitution, is corrupt, they haven't done anything, they don't want a Constitution because that's their power base. It sounds like you're saying, Zach, that in fact what we need to do is elect new legislators who in fact will make those changes. Am I getting that straight?
pretty much, regardless of how you look at it, even if you had to re-elect all 63 state senators, that's easier than electing 204 delegates. As someone who runs campaigns, I would rather run 63 races than 204 races. It's a simple matter of logistics, frankly. But we do agree on almost everything, all of the changes we're talking about.
Okay, so let's go ahead. So Earl, would you stand up and just say your name and ask a question?
How you do? I'm Erwin Scribble. I think that underlying the exchange between these two very well-informed people, and I believe they're both having excellent intentions as to the future of democratic rights for us, we need to take a much closer look at the meaning of dark money. Dark money, it doesn't refer to a teachers union, for example, openly and publicly through democratic decision-making within its internal structure, giving money to a particular cause. That's not dark money. That's democracy at work. However, dark money means the systematic funneling of wealth, usually great wealth, from the largest, most powerful multinational corporations in the world through means that are not available to public scrutiny to bankroll such things as the election of an extreme right-wing candidate for Congress who tries to pass himself off as a moderate. And I don't need to draw pictures to any of you good people about where this has actually happened. So my point is that by its very meaning, by its very inherent mode of operation, dark money is not going to be available to us in the immediate here and now for our scrutiny, because to do that, you would need the resources of the major national print and electronic media. And I profoundly fear for what's going to happen at a constitutional convention when the dark money, which is very skillfully hidden from view, will only show up after the fact and after basic rights for labor union organizing, basic rights to opportunity for education, basic electoral protections, they can be all too easily wiped out. So we need to be careful when we refer to the reality, the harsh reality of dark money. It's scary, and the people who are the source of dark money know perfectly well over the years how to hide it and make sure that the ordinary voters and taxpayers don't see it until it's much too late in the game.
So thank you, and I think maybe let me kind of reframe it maybe as a question for maybe to Gerald. This is certainly a concern. So how would we deal with some of what Erwin's talking about as a major concern?
Well, I didn't say dark money was, union money was dark money, I said it was big money. And the number 5 million I got at a debate that Donald Grover was at, so it was given by a union representative, that's where my number came from. So that's for the record. Now, additionally, when the American Revolution occurred, the people who fought on the revolutionary side risk their lives. And if they had failed, they would have been dead. So people have to make choices about risk. That risk was quite substantial. Now, what we're talking, let me forward that point. We're talking about risk against benefit. Do we want to take the risk of having an event and electing people democratically to that event to change what's wrong with our system and keeps what's good with it and improve our system, or do we want to not take that risk? If you don't want to take that risk because of some hypothetical appearance of some threatening and massive force, then you should not take the risk. But I think that this is an invention of Irwin and people who agree with him to keep people from acting in a democratic fashion. The democratic process is elect the people to the convention and make the changes that are necessary. I know that this legislature has not limited campaign contributions to incumbent legislators in any substantial way. And I have actually been a litigant in a lawsuit that's ongoing on appeal now to prevent them from taking multiple contributions from limited liability corporations organized individually by a single person, 50 or 100 corporations that spend up to the limit. So I'm engaged against big money in New York politics. I don't like big money in New York politics. I like democracy. And I want to get democracy by changing the status quo, not leaving power in the hands of people who've demonstrated that they will maintain essentially a corrupt system.
Okay, so going back to, so basically we're talking about electing delegates through the same process that is existing that elected what you say is the corrupt legislature. So it's the same process, and going back to 1967 again, 80% of, the number that I got from a pro-ConCon professor at Cornell is that in 1967, 80% of the delegates were either elected officials or their staff. So we're not talking about electing people who are interested in the changes you're talking about. This is the problem. That's history. We have to look at history and see what has happened. That's the best informant, in my opinion.
Well, let me correct the record. 16 delegates in the 1967 convention were elected legislators, among them a member of Congress. 20 delegates were elected judges. Some of the other delegates were former public officials. None of them were delegates before the convention was decided. People can be nominated to be delegates. Now, these organizations that have been popped up all over the United States to take back the political system and have called themselves the resistance, want to take back their government. They're being given an institution that will let them take back their government. And they're not taking the opportunity because they're saying, hey, we'll lose the election if we try to take back our government. To me, there's a certain incongruity about the argument that you want to take back your government, you're given a chance to do that, and then you don't take the opportunity because you're scared that you'll lose. You create the opportunity, then you go out and win the election.
Okay, yes, go ahead. Tell us, stand up and say your name, please.
My name is Latanya Marquette. I'm from Northern. I have to take sides, I think, more with Zach and with Irwin. I hear what you're saying, and there are risks that, you have, but you really need to make an educated evaluation of what you're dealing with, and an educated evaluation of your strengths and weaknesses. And from what I have seen, the things that I have been reading, there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are being collected and funneled. This is truly dark money. You're dealing with the Koch brothers and their organization on a national level, that's called ALEC. But what they've been doing, which we don't see too much of, certainly not in the mainstream press, is that they have set up state organizations that mirror ALEC. And their goal now is to move into the states, to take over the states, to create a one-party, top-down, political, system. They have, the number that I read the other day is they've got something like 35, 37 organizations. They're all front organizations. They all come with very benign sounding names like Liberty and Freedom and, you know, fill in the blank. But they all work in a very coordinated fashion. They are all, they get scripts. They bring in people that pretend that they're independent to say, oh, I really support this. And those people, like trolls, send out letters to the editor, they come to public meetings and stand up and make statements. They've got a very, very heavy and tight-knit organization with just hundreds of millions of dollars ready to move into the states. And of course, they're pushing for these conventions. And my concern is that unless people are really assessing their ability and their strength to contend with that kind of secret type of stealth organization, then to do what you're suggesting, to me, it's like, it's just like jumping off, you know, the cliff and thinking that you're going to be okay.
Would you explain what ALEC is? 'Cause I'm not sure.
ALEC is the,
ALEC.
it's an organization.
American Legislative
Executive
Exchange, right.
It's a right-wing model
Yeah.
Very.
organization that drafts model legislation for introduction at the state
Right.
level.
It's an organization of politicians
They
and large
train
business.
state legislators.
That's right, they buy them, they put them into office, they write the bills that they want, they get people into office, and they give them the bills already made for them to push through Congress. And, you know, if you read any of the quotes from them, you know, people will maybe, you know, attend their meetings and bring out quotes and things like that, they're really pretty nefarious. You know, their goal is very specifically to get in and undo all the civil liberties type things. You know, it's that whole neocon type of agenda of getting rid of anything that's public, turning it all into private enterprise. I'm sure everybody here has read stuff like that.
I'd like you to put it in as form of a question perhaps to Jerry, because this is one of the risks and one of the fears. And maybe there's a way you can respond to how do you...
Well, first of all, conservative ideas are legitimate ideas. If a convention was held, they'd be entered like any other ideas would be entered. In the democratic process, the range of ideas need to be considered and they'd be advanced. If we had a convention, I think the partisan control of the convention would be the Democrats because of the nature of New York politics, and Republicans would be in a minority. I think that conservative organizations would be less influential, probably minimally influential in the convention. I've studied New York politics for 50 years. Of course, I'm naive about dark money because apparently I haven't paid enough attention to it. But I think I can understand what's likely to happen in a statewide election in New York of delegates. And I've played pretty close attention. There's another point that's very interesting to me. New York is much more diverse in 2017 than it was in 1938 or than it was in 1894. So here we have a chance, we have a legislature that's in fact doesn't have sufficient numbers of women, but it has a significant number of women, far larger number than it used to have. My recollection is approaching 30%. Now, don't quote me on that, that's a recollection. It has a significant number of minority members. If we had a constitutional convention, we'd have Hispanic members, we'd have African American members, we'd have women members in much different proportions than we had in 1938, where there were virtually none. And wait a minute, and they'd be redefining the governance of New York. So we can have opportunity or we can have fear. That's the choice.
Okay, so going back to something before her comment, the whole idea that we have these groups that are talking if they want to take back their democracy, et cetera, et cetera. Well, two things. One, I suppose you would probably group me as one of those people. I was tasked with running 3 congressional districts in New York for the Bernie Sanders campaign. I'm the capital region coordinator for our revolution. And the fact is, you don't just go scattergun. You don't waste your energy. And again, simple logistics. Worst case scenario, what we need in New York is, very worst case scenario, maybe you have to elect 63 state senators. Why would you waste your time running 204 races when all you need is 63 in the worst case scenario? It's just simple logistics from my perspective.
Yeah, but it seems to me that the specifics of what this lady was talking about, I mean, I have heard about ALEC in terms of how they go into states and they actually train legislators and they actually help them write the bills that undermine, our public education and undermine public educational unions, teachers unions and all. How can we protect ourselves and do what you're suggesting? How do we protect ourselves from a group like that?
If I were running the UFT or the American Federation of Teachers or NYS, I would write constitutional provisions that I wanted to see enacted in a convention. I would require equal educational opportunity for all children in New York. I would replace the current provision, the current mandate on the legislature with a mandate that's results-oriented, not telling the legislature that a minimal education is insufficient. I would constitutionalize the public university system. I would include the 13th through 16th grades in the concept of the required education, because that's a 21st century situation. I would have an affirmative, I'm an educator for 50 years, I'd have an affirmative agenda for the education, not, here comes somebody who wants to take something away from me. I'm gonna not make sure not to have a meeting where that can happen.
So, all right, do we want to move on? Questions?
Well, good, let's, good, Kathy, good. What? That's a good.
Well, my point is, one, on the dark money side of that, unions are dramatically outspent by PACs all day long. The largest union contributor in the country is outspent by a factor of 6 to 1 by a lot of the corporate PACs. And there are way more corporate PACs than unions. That's just a fact, because unions are membership based. There's no way that any number of unions is going to be able to compete with that money. The other thing is, there are these pieces of legislation. There are these ideas for amendments. They're there. Most of them are already in legislative form or amendment form, sitting on some assembly member's desk. So if you go to a constitutional convention, all you're going to do is you're going to be picking up pieces of legislation that already exist and trying to get somebody else to pass them. And we've already talked about why it's, again, most of these things die in the state senate. It's the state senate that's the problem, really.
Addressing the issue of, I'm Kathy Doherty and NEWAC Steering Committee and facilitators for the Women's Issues Group. And last year we went to Albany and we lobbied for the Reproductive Health Act and learned a lot about New York politics that none of us knew, mostly about the independent Democratic caucus members, that is the reason why the Democratic Party is so stymied in New York, because they separate themselves from the rest of the Democrats and have a separate vote for who they want as a majority leader, which leaves the Republicans in an artificial majority, which makes the Republicans have the Senate majority leader, Senator Flanagan, and he then blocks all progressive legislation from even coming to the floor for a vote. So the Comprehensive Contraceptive Care Act has not been passed or even been come to the floor, even though the sponsor of that bill is Bonacek, who is a Republican and our Republican. He can't get it out of he can't get it to the floor because it's blocked by Flanagan, and he's facilitated by the IDC. So, to me, as a New Yorker, my primary concern is to get rid of the IDC in the next election, and I am afraid, given the kind of lies that the IDC state when they are campaigning, they say outright lies about their support of the RHA, which they support in principle, on paper, but not in vote or in lobbying. My concern is that if we have an election that complicates this election, things are scary now. It's scarier than it was. I would love for a Democratic convention and to believe that the people will make decisions. But I don't trust it anymore. I don't.
And so-
And I want to work on the IDC being defeated, which makes me feel as though
We could do something.
Yeah,
that it's a valid point. And I know you'll agree with me. I would like to hear it.
Yeah, but I just want to comment, that is a good explanation.
So this is a complex internal political battle that has nothing to do with issues. It has everything to do with ambition. Now, if they sort that difference out and become the majority, the dynamic relationship between the Senate and the Assembly will change. They'll be in the same party. But they won't move the legislation without the governor. And the governor hasn't been completely predictable on any of these matters either. You know, and so, yes, there is a New York politics problem in the operation of the government that can be fixed politically. You know, but the structural issues with the way New York government works aren't going to be fixed politically. They're going to be fixed by giving the matter to somebody else to decide. Now, I would prefer it if you said to me, Jerry, just change Articles 1, 2, and 3. They happen to be about, Article 1 is the Bill of Rights, which has some other things in it. Article 2 is the legislative article. Article 3 is the executive article. I would throw in the courts. Just change the 3 articles having to do with the major institutions. If we could do that, I would agree to that compromise, but I can't. I can't agree. All I have is an all or nothing proposition. If we want to fix New York government, we have to give the job to somebody else. We can't elect 6 senators because then they'll become incumbent senators, and they'll have a stake in the system as it is.
Is that the chance?
Well, you know, we talk about the binary issue now, but, you know, the most democratic way to do this really is by getting a ballot initiative mechanism like a lot of other states have. This way we don't have to, you know, a citizen comes up with an idea, they collect signatures, enough signatures, it ends up on the ballot eventually. So you completely bypass a lot of the issues with electing delegates that way. So, you know, that would be probably a constitutional amendment that I would support, which would render this discussion moot in 20 years, hopefully.
Well, but precisely, to get such an initiative and referendum proposition, you need a convention. You're not going to get it from the legislature, that's for sure.
Well, how are you suggesting we get it?
Well, the way I'm advocating is through the legislature. You know, you have to, you know, a lot of the issues you're talking about that deal with corruption and ethics and this money, a lot of these issues have historically passed the Assembly by big margins, even sometimes veto-proof majorities in the Assembly. So all you need is a simple majority in each chamber to get an amendment to appear on the ballot for the people to decide, and you get that ballot initiative amendment through the legislature by electing a few senators, and you put it on the ballot.
That's not quite right.
It's more complicated than that, but that's the basic structure.
Not quite right. You have to pass it twice with an intervening election.
Yes.
And the fact of the matter is that initiative and referendum was debated in New York, and Donald Roberts here, he knows this better than I do. In 1894, it was debated in 1915. It didn't pass then, even at a convention, let alone through the legislature. New York has been massively resistant to initiative and referendum. We have some referendum in local government, but at the state level, it's a very hard proposition. I like it, while we're talking about how to do it, the Florida commission system is wonderful. There's a commission created every 10 years, 2 commissions actually, one on monetary matters, one on other matters. That commission deliberates, there's multiple appointing authorities involved, and then they decide on system changes that they put before the people of Florida to get to vote, and the legislature has nothing to say about it, and the governor does. There are institutional methods to do these things, and we could fix our change process, but we're not going to fix it if we don't have a convention, because the legislature doesn't want to be bypassed. Now, I was a politician. I don't hate politicians. I think very many politicians are honorable. I think the institutions are failing. And a lot of people, a significant number of people are corrupt. We like to say, we don't like to, we say, that more people are removed by indictment and conviction than are removed by failure of re-election. But the point is, Institutional change has to be made by some special process. It's not going to be made by ordinary process.
So my understanding is you're suggesting a convention, and you're suggesting the change process happen by electing different senators in particular.
That's the easier way, yes.
Because the Senate right now is a conservative, do-nothing, corrupt body, and that's where all...
Well, the Assembly's not exempt, believe me. The
Yeah,
Speaker was
okay.
indicted.
But it's Senate, the last three speakers, the leaders were indicted, so, you know.
The Assembly.
Well, you know, we haven't looked at tomorrow's newspaper yet.
True.
So Ellen, I think, has a question.
I'm Ellen Rocco.
I would just stand up so we can hear you.
I'm Ellen Rocco, and I'm on the UAC Elect Committee and the Women's Issues Committee. And I have a question related to Alec, and if it's off point, please tell me that. But it is actually one of my worst nights. We can't hear. It's one of my worst nightmares, and I'm saying if it's not really relevant to this, then I'm happy to, just worry about it myself. And that is this, my understanding, it would take 33 state legislatures, 33 state governments to call for a U.S. constitutional convention. There are currently,
3/4 of the states.
I thought it was 2/3.
3/4 are ratified, 2/3 are called. That's correct. You're correct.
So, my understanding is that there are currently 32 state governments that are Republican, 12 that are Democratic, and 6 that are split. I'm worrying about New York State Constitutional Convention, as worried as I am about it, is small potatoes compared to a U.S. Constitutional Convention. So I think what I'm saying or feeling is that while I came in opposed to the idea of a Constitutional Convention, I have great respect for Gary, and I was willing to be swayed, and there were moments when I was feeling myself
I
swayed.
didn't leave soon enough.
I'm sorry.
I didn't leave soon enough. You were swayed and I said,
On the other hand, the procedure to go after the New York State Senate and throw our energies into that, in some ways is perhaps more productive. And my extension of that question then is, because my understanding is that Alec is responsible for a lot of the terms in the state legislatures that are now Republican. And I would like to know, I need to know, what if any connections there are between Alec and Reclaim New York.
let me just say a couple of things. First, don't confound the National Constitutional Convention movement with the State Constitutional Convention process. They're distinct processes. And the national...
I understand that.
Okay, so people raise this concern with me, and it confounds the conversation, and then we're off adding a negative argument that is not germane. So let's try to not confound those two things. I know that you know that, but it's a sensitive point to me because I don't want a U.S. Constitutional Convention. Very few people I know want that, and that's not what we're talking about. So number two, I don't know the relationship between ALEC and any group in New York. I know a lot about ALEC, which far into seats current. It's an organization that's existed a long time. It didn't just come into existence. But they got re-energized with these resources. Regarding the state legislatures, gerrymandering, once in power, has given the Republican state legislatures enormous continuity. And in those states where gerrymandering has been resisted by redistricting reform, like California, that process has been halted or reversed. There is now major question before the Supreme Court regarding the restricting partisan gerrymandering, egregious partisan gerrymandering, and the case has been taken, which is quite extraordinary. So the remedy, seems to me that the remedy is through litigation, antecedent to the results of the census result coming in the year 2010. We need to have new rules to recapture to make, I don't want to take a side on this, but to make competitive the elections in those states.
So, two things. I don't know the relationship between ALEC and Reclaim New York either. I know that ALEC has a much larger number of funders. Reclaim New York has a very small pool, and to my knowledge, they're not the same people, but I don't know that for certain. On redistricting, historically, the courts have held that political affiliation is not a protected class, and therefore they don't necessarily necessarily strike down district realignment based upon party affiliation. Things like race are obviously protected classes that they have struck down. So it will be very interesting to see what the court does with this new case.
This is right here.
Oh, thank you. Just see that. Katie Tobin, New Paltz. First off, Katie Tobin, New Paltz. First off, Dare Thompson texted me back. She's the president of the League of Women Voters of New York State, and they are for the Constitutional Convention. So we have clarity on that point. So, as someone who identifies as a person who's a member of the resistance, I found myself incredibly disappointed in my peers that they are playing defense on this rather than offense. I think Bernie Sanders, who's the only reason I'm a Democrat right now, showed that you can win elections by small donors in small amounts, and I think Zephyr, who also didn't win, Bernie didn't win, Zephyr didn't win, but I believe they're the beginning, not the end. And I believe that this movement needs to take off on that momentum, and this will be very much a lost opportunity if we don't take off on that momentum. Instead of always resisting, I also think that we need to create, and this is a tremendous opportunity to create. I can't even keep track of all the groups in just Ulster County alone that have sparked up in the resistance, and I see tons of people ready, willing, and able to knock on doors and do the things. I've been elected to office twice, so I know a little bit about how to do that. And I see a lot of power in the streets. When Anisa Kamenser knocked on my door on a Sunday afternoon this summer to debate with me about ConCon, I don't think she knew what she was going to get. I'm a proud union member, and I want my union spending money not on canvassers that are fighting against this, but that are actually fighting for this. So my question actually is for Jared, who in full disclosure I work for, but also we agree and disagree on a regular basis in very healthy, robust ways. You brought up the math, the 114 Democrats, the 90 Republicans. If you could just talk a little bit more about how you got to that math. I don't think taking over the Senate and getting a progressive majority elected to a convention are mutually exclusive. But I don't think that people understand how we get to that 204 and how you got to that 114 and 90. So if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, just very briefly. This is evidence that I have good judgment. I hired her. She was just a young child. Now she's all grown. There are 63 Senate districts. There are 3 delegates elected from each Senate district by constitutional mandate. So do the math. Right? 63 Senate districts, 3 from each district, so 189 delegates, right, from districts. Then there's a mandate that there are 15 elected statewide. So that's 204, if I have that right. I went to PS 219, and in 1951 we were taught to do this in our head. I've also done it a lot in the last few days. Okay, so 204 delegates. Now, Senate districts return Democrats and Republicans. You can count the independent Democrats as Democrats, but let's for the moment say they return Democrats. If you look at the Senate districts, when you look at the districts that are overwhelmingly in favor of Democrats, where there's no competition, or where Democrats get 80 or 85% of the vote, and you look at the districts that are overwhelmingly Republican, where there are no Democratic candidates, where the Republicans get 80, 85 to 90% of the vote. You could, as a matter of methodological choice, allocate those districts fully to that party for a convention. So you get a number of Democratic delegates and a number of Republicans. And if you look at the competitive districts and you say, well, there are Democrat prevailed in a competitive district in Long Island, there are some examples. But Long Island always is used to returning Republicans a lot of the time. So let's allocate 2 of those delegates, the 3, to the Democrats because they won the last election. Let's allocate 1 to the Republicans. And similarly, if you go to the districts where the Republicans prevailed by close votes, make the same methodological judgment. So I looked at the outcomes of the last election. It wasn't a complicated methodology. I looked at where each party was dominant, and then I said, what's going to happen with the 15 elected at large? Now, usually in New York, that election is partisan, and you can elect the whole slate, but now we have a technology where you don't have to elect the whole slate because it's actually easier to vote for individuals in the current technology than in the old technology. You had to stick a little sticker on the machine and roll it in to split your ticket for the convention in 1966. The technology is not great now to this day. So now there's another point that I want to make after this. But so when I did that, I came up with the number 100, and then I went back to Long Island and I said, I'm going to give the Republicans more outcomes in Long Island than this methodology gave me, because I might be overestimating the divided outcome. And so I split that in half, and I came up roughly with 114 to 90. Now, if you reason back from that, and I added the 15 Democrats statewide, if you reason back to that and split the statewide vote, you still get 110 to 94, 109 to 95. So I think it's pretty confident that it's going to be a Democrat-controlled convention, as the '67 convention was. Now. So that's how I did it. I'll stop there. There's a lot of other things to say about it.
So to some of those points, the person I mentioned earlier who won the district that had never been won by a Republican was Christine Pellegrino. She was a delegate for Bernie Sanders, and she was one of the founders of NYS actually. So that was our test case of how we run elections. Now, it's good to be aspirational, but you also have to be realistic. Now, everyone is talking about, Congress. Now we're talking about state Senate being critical. Then if you have to elect 240 delegates, you have to understand that people don't vote straight party line as much as you think they do. My town, we had, let's see, Clinton, my town has a Democratic majority, and, they sometimes have a 20-point split between who votes for the Republican on one race and who votes for the Democrat on the other race. So you have to come to terms with the fact that if you're running 204 extra elections, you're taking away resources from a congressional race or a state Senate race. There are never going to be enough resources to run an extra 204 races. Historically, people don't even turn out to work on local races is the problem. Now, if we had 100% participation, that would be much better. But, I live in a reality where even in January, I was speaking at a rally in front of, on healthcare in front of Congressman Fasso's office, and I brought up this point. Well, if all 1,000 people standing here today committed themselves to spending one shift a week, which in electoral terms a shift is 1 to 3 hours, working on a campaign, it wouldn't matter how much money was put in that race. You could win that. And after that 1,000-person rally, I had 3 people come up to me and ask me how to get involved and how to work on elections. The reality is that a large majority of people, even involved in the resistance groups, unfortunately, are not going to also put in the concerted effort to work on every single race that is going to be on the ballot next year. It's the unfortunate reality.
Okay, so let me just check in with you. There are a couple more questions that people have. It's, we have another 20 minutes. We were thinking of dividing into small groups, you'd have a chance to talk. People don't want to do that. Okay, so let's just go on with the okay, Mr. Oakley, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not standing in interest of saving time.
Okay.
For the point of identification, I'm Don Roper from New Paltz, and I interviewed this gentleman for his first job here 45 years ago.
It's his fault, ladies and gentlemen.
So we get that out of the way. We're here to see what constitutional conventions can obtain. It doesn't have to it doesn't have its recommendations accepted to be influential. We'll go back to 1915. The most important figure at that convention was in the minority, a guy by the name of Alfred Emanuel Smith. In the 1920s, we saw among the most significant constitutional developments in the century. All right. And the ideas that he planted at that time and the recognition he got brought about those changes in the 1920s, really significant constitutional change. I rest my case.
I wanted to make sure everyone has a chance to speak, so maybe you can ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Please stand up and give your name.
You're going to stand up.
My name is Dan Torres. I live in New Paltz. I was interested in that idea that you brought up about the coordination in the races. I've run in races and I've worked on congressional races, and often they're coordinated campaigns. It's not that, there's an election on Tuesday and there's a slate of candidates running. They don't appear on the ballot together, but they run as a group. So I'm curious why you think that when it comes to these delegates that it detracts resources opposed to people running together for the state and federal offices, which is the system that presently happens now in most candidates. Why would it be different
So the
for
reality,
constitutional candidates opposed to other electioneers?
regardless of what, all right, anytime you increase the number of people who are running, if you're running a coordinated campaign, for example, some counties in the state have 4 legislators in every district. So you end up walking to the door with 6 to 8 pieces of literature sometimes, and the person you hand it to will only look at the first one. In terms of running elections, and even if you have identical resources, in terms of running elections and shaping voter behavior, you're dramatically reducing the effectiveness if you're doing that sort of campaign. And the reality is that you need more people to run campaigns with more candidates. That's the primary voter turnout issue.
You're saying your experience is different?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is it's not like it's a disadvantage for a single party. It would be one thing if the Democrats, for example, they were running people and the Republicans weren't. But
The other problem is that in some counties, and I've worked in these counties, there are at least 2 counties that I've worked in where the Democratic Party chair has gone out and told candidates, do not campaign for this person, do not carry their literature. So, you're going to have areas where even if you have the candidates on the same page, you're going to have people forcing the necessity of greater resources. It's just the
But isn't that an issue? But that's an issue regardless of if there's a constitutional convention. That's kind of what I'm
But those are exacerbated when you add another 204 candidates.
It's like you have different experiences, is that what you're saying?
I mean, I think that a coordinated campaign is different in every county, but I think the notion that saying as a blanket statement that because you have those additional candidates that it'll be a weaker race or that resources will not be there, I don't think is an accurate statement as a statement for all over New York.
So it sounds like your experience is different.
Yes.
Your experience is different from that. Okay. So let's move on. So go ahead. Tom,
Is somebody else?
Lots of
I had my
questions.
hand up for.
Sure, go ahead. Would you say your name, please?
Sure, my name is Jacqueline Reed, my address is New Paltz, but I actually live in Gardner. What interests me about this is because I think we live in a very qualitatively different time. I mean, everybody can say that, you know, in their own time, but we live in a qualitatively different time. And what I hear you both saying is talking about basic democratic processes, basic institutions, be they unions, be they legislative, be whatever. First thing is, I think we need to start truth-telling to everybody, particularly our young people. The democratic processes are messy, they're dirty. There's many elements that are unfair about them. I've been involved since I was in college, right? I remember my first state representative race, and I was so disillusioned because he worked really hard and my candidate lost. But we need to start truth-telling. We need to truth-tell. I'm a proud union member, but our unions have not served workers, they serve themselves. Until we start truth-telling, Trump and the right wing are going to continue to make, well, this, I'm going to get there. So I think that the thing that I would like to hear you talk about and talk about together is, I think we need to learn how to be, you guys are modeling civic discourse. We need to model those civic processes. And I would ask you guys, how can you work together? How in your campaigns, which you both strongly feel have really, you know, valid position, how are you going to work together to increase democratic involvement? Because I'll tell you, I come from Iowa. I know what organizations like Reclaim America have done. Okay, I've seen it happen to my home state. I was there in the 80s when there were carloads of people going door to door knocking, saying all kinds of nonsense during the farm. And that's what Reclaim New York is going to use this as an opportunity. Whether they win or lose or whatever, it's an opportunity to move, to propagandize people. So my question to both of you is, how can you, in your own positions, in your own organizations, work together, be in civil discourse, but at the same time, continue to work to build that democratic involvement of individuals into our political system?
So on this specific topic of the Constitutional Convention, actually, a lot of the groups that are opposed are still working with groups like Effective New York who are in favor of the convention. Because the reality is we agree on policy, and you can walk into a room and talk about policy, and so a lot of these groups are already in discussion, and we're talking about what are the policies we all want. We're talking about what happens if it does pass. You know, we need delegates, and we would need delegates immediately. So, you know, there are groups that are already, you know, we're sitting up here debating how to do it, but a lot of the groups they're already talking to each other. And in terms of increasing participation, what we've seen this year in special elections, you can look across the board, and you do see higher participation than historically. And I think some of the figures I saw looking at a limited number of races was that voter participation had increased somewhere around 4 to 8%, which is good in itself. But also in counties like I'm the campaign manager for the Rensselaer County executive race right now. In that county, there's been a big upsurge in voter registration and people changing party affiliations and voter registration. So what we've seen in the last 12 months, it looks like there is going to be a significant uptick in participation just as a baseline. And then a lot of the groups that are working on the Constitutional Convention issue, part of their mission is also voter engagement, voter registration. So a lot of these groups are also working on getting more people registered and more people educated on, for example, the issue you brought up earlier, that you have to register 11 months in advance with a party in order to vote in the primary next year. So all of these issues go hand in hand, and I think that we are doing a pretty good job so far in increasing participation.
Well, I think you're observing civil discourse in the room.
Right, I think.
Okay? I think that the issue of engaging on a matter of substantial importance to New York is modeled in the debate on the Constitutional Convention question. I think it's this is my ninth appearance. I'm going to do at least 20 appearances. and I'm being paid expenses for some of them, but I'm not anybody's agent or employee in doing it. I'm doing it mostly as a volunteer. So that's happening. I think we face really big problems. I don't have the time to go into every nuance, but the Constitution says that our elections have to be run in this bipartisan manner with the boards of elections that are essentially been captured by the major political parties and are collusive, is a collusive matter in election administration. The Constitution also has a lot of provisions about who gets to vote that have to be addressed if we want to take down some of the barriers to voting that some people like the Attorney General have been arguing for. Now, I actually don't think those are the best remedies for participation. I think communal incentives and neighbors' expectations that bring people to the polls in rural areas need to be found for urban areas. Motivating people by social interaction, it turns out in rural New York, gets much higher turnout than in urban New York. So we need to think about some non-obvious remedies, and that's a whole other topic. But there's a constitutional dimension to this. I gave testimony before a state commission on integrity. I asked them why they didn't address the constitutional dimensions of the problem. It's one thing to catch people who break the rules. It's another thing to address the system that gives us those people. At the end of the day, when I was in the Army, I was taught that extraordinary people can run organizations, notwithstanding their structure, but ordinary people have to be able to run organizations. They have to be organizations that can be managed effectively by ordinary, honest, well-meaning people, not extraordinary people. And we're talking about a massive undertaking. So we need systems that work. And that's what the convention idea is about. Regarding undermining our system, we have to be vigilant. I wasn't kidding when I talked about the revolution. People took high risks because they were motivated by complicated ways, by a lot of things, but ultimately they took risks for a better system. Every time we met in convention in New York in the 19th century, we asked the question, people routinely said, yes, let's look at it. And they didn't make things worse, they made things better, because they routinely believed they had the capacity to make things better, and they had this ideal about how we should be governed, and they were driven by ideas about, Jacksonian democracy, a new set of ideas about how things should work, the progressive era, a new set of ideas, and they gathered and they revised their institution. Donald talked about Al Smith, who was educated in a Republican convention and transformed New York in the 1920s. We have lost the notion that we can do better.
But I'm not sure it answers But Jerry, I'm not sure it answers, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure either one of you answered the question.
Well, I am answering it. I mean, she's worried about this, and I'm worried about it too. I'm worried about a society that purports to be based in democratic participation, where we don't believe we can do better, and we believe every time we try to do better, it gets worse. That's not my notion about what the way the democratic population should engage with their political system.
Okay. How many more questions do we have? So there are 4 more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more questions, and we have 10 minutes. So can you each do it in a minute? Okay,
Can we stay later? We want to go on, can't we stay later?
And we have the building, a certain amount of time too. I need to say to Claire, and I'm on the steering committee for UACT and facilitator for the environment committee. And I was just going to ask a question, but I just wanted to make a really short statement before I ask a really short question. I was at the town hall that Kirsten Gillibrand had recently, and one of the things that she said was that she saw that we really made a difference. She said that the Trump Health Care Act would have passed if it hadn't been for us. So I just want to piggyback off of what both of you are saying, because I already knew that in my heart of hearts, but I thought to hear her say that as a person who's in DC, to say what you guys are doing is making all the difference, don't stop. So whether you decide yes on the Constitutional Convention, you want to bust your butt to get delegates that aren't funded by Mercer or the Koch brothers, or whether you want to do what Zach is saying and work on campaigns, I just want to impart that message from Kirsten that we have to keep going and that we do make a difference. Okay? All right, off my podium. Now here's my question. When does the election I'm sorry, does the election for the delegates happen at the same time as another election or in a separate election?
The delegate election is the same time as your primaries and general election next year.
Okay, so that it could be,
Same
that
ballot.
there's a, I can't think of what the word is.
Is
But
both
there's-
primary, at the primary as well as at the general?
So,
Let me say this, if we can pass a law, after we authorize a convention, we can pass a law that changes the rules for delegate election. The legislature can do that because the rules for delegate election are not constitutional. The number of delegates, now the districts are constitutional.
but I just want to
So it
understand
could
it
be,
for
but
now, though.
routinely, we have to assume that it would occur in the primary.
Okay, so we have to go with what we have now, the order. So we have a ballot, and so even if people don't understand about the ConCon, even if they haven't heard anything at all about the delegates, if they're like on a Democratic line, they could just vote and say, I'm a Democrat, I'm just gonna vote for all of them?
That would, unless we can find a way to have, I'm very much in favor of independent candidacies for delegate. So if we could find a way to get the law changed,
Yeah.
I think that we probably have a challenge to the law if we authorize a convention and the rules would be addressable.
That would require the legislature to change the rules within a very short time period
Yeah.
next spring, and, you know. you're
And
just-
also for people to even be aware.
Or a
and
federal court.
To be involved in
It'll-
this.
There'll be very high visibility if it's authorized. It'll be very high visibility.
Okay, yeah, Misha. Okay, my name is Misha. My name is Misha Javier Newhouse. I have one concern and one question. So we have these 204 delegates, and the majority of the delegates are from the legislature, and then there is how many, 19 or 15, just people like me. Okay?
All people like you.
Huh?
Anyone.
No,
There are
no.
15
So the-
that are elected statewide, and there are 3 delegates elected from each state senate district.
Okay, so that makes them 3 times 63. So that's 190 from the legislature.
No, the legislature does not automatically serve at a convention. The legislature is a separate institution. There's a separate election for delegates.
Some of those people could be that, it doesn't matter who you are, you could be a legislator or a normal person. And still be elected.
Okay.
Yes, a legislator.
Okay, so you become a legislator just for the purpose of the convention.
It's called delegate.
You're a delegate for the
Right,
convention.
right. But you don't necessarily have to be from the existing.
No.
By
Okay,
no
fine.
means.
Okay, that answers my good question.
So you could be
The
elected,
concern-
Misha.
Thank you. The question then is this, so the convention meets,
Right.
and everybody proposes, or people propose that various concerns that they have about various of the issues,
Right.
the articles of the Constitution. And eventually they agree on 15 articles to be changed, adjusted, amended, deleted, some edit. And then in 2019, 2019, you get a ballot, and the ballot says, as you said, either or. Okay, we have chosen to change 15 articles. Do you people agree with it? Or we have chosen these 15 articles, and you can vote on each of them, whether you as a voter agree with it or not. How do you think it would actually happen? There is no law really, it can be either or, and who decides, because I don't want to vote on 15 articles
It's
that I don't know what they
It's
are.
the convention that decides how it's presented. They have absolute authority to write their own rules, and they decide how it's presented on the
Individual or
ballot.
vote on the whole thing.
In 1938, they submitted 10 or 11 questions, I think 10 questions, 8
Which is
passed.
preferable,
They had
yes.
one question called the omnibus question that had a lot of detailed matters in it. And they had other questions that were high visibility, serious changes in the Constitution that were separately presented. And most passed. In 67, they took one question, and it was a massive political mistake. It passed by a very narrow majority at the convention toward the end of the convention. And because a lot of people were against one or the other part of the Constitution, the the aggregated effect was to defeat the Constitution. Now, let me tell you one other thing. In 1987, I was involved in changing the New York City Charter. And we had to do that because the New York City government was unconstitutional for reasons I won't go into, mercifully won't go into. We looked at the record, and the head of the commission was a guy named Ravitch. He's a pretty well-known guy. And he came to the staff and he said, "What should I do?" And we studied it. I said, "Give them a number of questions, so the things that are really controversial, if they don't want to do them, they won't defeat all the work that we've done." And we gave the city 5 questions. One issue that was very controversial had to do with historic preservation of buildings, which the real estate industry was fighting with this.
Jerry, I'm gonna,
So the point is, we learn from the experience, and we will learn again.
so you're saying that the convention can decide to do individual or to do anonymous?
I have no clue how it will show up, the convention decides at the end.
Because if they tell us, okay, we have voted and we have selected 15 articles and now you can say yes or no, we don't know which articles we will be voting for.
It's all up for grabs.
You
That's
You would know. Yeah, you'd have the whole
We
list.
don't know now.
No,
but
they
we'll know now.
would tell me, okay, 15 articles have been voted to be changed.
So it'll be probably, we give publicity to the actual things that were.
But you
Okay, they
would
would
know
be.
them. Yes.
Each convention decides how they're gonna run themselves. One more question, gentlemen, do you want to bring this?
My name's Noel Acevedo. I was a former recording secretary of the Transport Workers Union and trustee of NYS at one time. I just want to just make a couple of points. First of all, relying on the federal government to protect the pensions is not, a really intelligent thing to do. We're talking about the PVGC, which is essentially underfunded to such a point that if a pension is in trouble now, you're going to lose a great deal of the benefit. And that's the federal program that Professor Benjamin stated that exists as protection for pensions. Now, the city and the state have pension systems. I was a trustee to NYS. As a transport worker, I have a pension from NYS. And that has some city and state repercussions because the pensions are legislative in nature. So the state does have a lot of influence on how's that done. So that's a concern of the unions. Now, Mr. Benjamin stated that the unions have put forth $5 million to fight this. I think the pro-constitutional people will frame this as this is a special interest type of thing. The unions don't want to give up their benefits. $5 million is a lot of money, and both as a recording secretary of the union, I'm fully aware that the unions just don't have the kind of money to compete with the moneyed interests. They never have. The powers of the union were the ability to put bodies in the field. That's the power that the unions always had politically, to put the people out in the field to push the issues. So it's never been money. So we're at a disadvantage on the money, and now with Citizens United and the dark money, which I fear as much as anyone else, and that I fear everyone should fear, where there is actually no accountability, as opposed to every dollar that a union spends on a political issue has to be accounted for. The legal statutes are very strict. So I just want to counter the point of framing this as a special interest union against the Constitution. And on a personal note, my heart is with Professor Benjamin, but my mind is not. So I really, as a New Yorker, we all are fully aware of the dysfunction in the state government. I mean, it's legendary. It's been like that for so long.
I'm going to ask you to sit.
I just want to close it out. My heart is with you, Professor. I fully support that.
Well, there's one factual matter that I just want to bring up. I'm talking about the contract clause of the U.S. Constitution, not the administrative process used for regulating pensions under law. I'm saying that the contract clause of the U.S. Constitution protects pensions which are specified as contracts in New York law. So I have a contract with New York State because I'm a New York State potential retiree if I live through this meeting. and New York State has to honor that contract, not only because of the state constitution, because of the federal contract clause, not the administrative process of private sector.
Yeah, but in terms of actual protection, the private pensions are protected under the PBGC, and as the contract provisions also include the state's responsibilities and the city's responsibility.
He's tier 1.
He's tier 1, I'm tier 4.
Let's give this lady one last question. Stay out.
Yeah, no. I'm not denying it.
I am going to be the naive, uninformed New Paltz resident. My name is Martha Axel. I know nothing, actually, about how all the state legislature, I follow the national pretty closely. But this may be a very naive question, but which would the legislative process deal with, or a convention, if the state went for public financing, as some states are considering? And that would change this whole money business that is corrupting our system.
We have a campaign to talk about.
And our campaigns on it, yes. So and I believe, frankly, naively, that perhaps most of the citizens of the state of New York would prefer public financing to the system that we now have. And so could that be worked in through the legislative process or the convention?
So it can be done either way. Now, on the issue of what people support, it's very strange that when there has been a lot of public polling to see what people believe on financing. There was one of the polls that I believe was mentioned earlier. They actually asked the question, would you support a constitutional amendment requiring public financing of elections? And the respondents said no. On the other hand, 90% of people say that they want to get money out of politics. So it's very strange. You don't really know based upon public polling, but everyone you talk to says they want to get money out of politics. But you can do it either way. And there have been, New York City has a public financing option.
A great model.
Yeah.
We could do it statutorily. We have not.
Right.
It has to essentially have a voluntary dimension to pass muster with the under national law and Supreme Court decisions. We could do it at a convention. My view is that we're more likely to get it at a convention. Citizens Union, I've been involved with Citizens Union for a while, for some years, and they've been very strongly advocating and not been successful.
So I think we're at the end of our meeting today. It's clearly a very complicated issue, and my takeaway is that you guys agree a lot in what the content is, and things really need to be changed. It sounds like you have very differences in the function, as you say, how to get there. Right, so I just encourage you all, I made a little list of links that came from both Jerry and from Zach. There should be enough, I think I may have 40 of them there. Or if your name is out there, I can put them out on an email list as well. I encourage everyone to choose something that matters to you and get involved in a way that's doable for you, so you're not overwhelmed, but so that you can actually feel like you're doing something and don't get depressed about the stuff that doesn't get done, but find something that you can do. So thank you for coming on a Sunday, and thank you so much.